today? That's great. Okay. What I could hear sounded good. Good response. Yeah, like Rod said, I work with a few different ministries here in YWAM Perth, and most of them are involved in the whole category of media and creative storytelling. One of my favorite things really is script writing. And when I run the school that I lead, the School of Frontier Media, that's one of the areas that I teach on. Just talking to people about writing stories or constructing stories in a way that, hopefully impacts our audience and is easy to watch and enjoyable and so on. And one of the interesting things I think about script writing, and when you have a story, is that really, it's important to have an interesting story, but even more important maybe is to be able to tell that story well, to tell that story effectively. And there's a lot of decision-making that comes into that process. If you tell a story based on your own life, as people often write, scripts or screenplays that are based on real events, you have almost like a limitless number of possible elements that you could include, right? If we think about our own life for any period of time, we were going to tell that story, we could include lots of different perspectives, lots of different elements, lots of different dimensions, but we have to make a choice all the time about what we're going to include in order to create the meaning or communicate the meaning that we want to share. And so tonight, I've been asked to give a message, obviously, but part of that was suggested that maybe it would involve doing some storytelling, telling some stories about myself, and drawing out, how God has represented Himself to me, and maybe to those around us through my own experiences. So hopefully the stories are interesting, but hopefully I also tell them well, and we're able to communicate something that God wants to say to us this evening. So just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from New York in the United States. I was born in Ohio, but I moved to New York when I was very young. And I grew up there in a Christian family, or with Christian parents anyway, going to church on a fairly regular basis. There were periods of time when I went to church, there were periods of time when I didn't. But most of the time I was going to church, and I believed in God. I made a sort of a youthful, I don't remember how old I was, but very young, commitment to follow God that I didn't really understand, what that was exactly. People told me that I should pray and ask Jesus to come into my heart, and so I had done that when I was a young child, kind of privately and secretly. I knew that it didn't really mean that there was a man actually standing inside of my chest, in the organ of my heart, but that was actually still the picture that was always in my mind. But as I grew up into, becoming a teenager, when I look back, I really see that a lot of my life was characterized by anxiety or characterized by fear, uncertainty about what it really meant to be a Christian. I really wanted to kind of grow in this area, but the thing is, I was aware of something that I lacked. Probably there were lots of things that I lacked, but there was something that I was really aware of, that I knew that, this is something that Christians do, or Christians are supposed to do, but I don't do this, and I find it terrifying, the thought of doing this. And this was just sharing my faith, just being open with other people about, God's call in my life, or I would never have put it that way, but just the fact that I was a Christian, just the fact that I believed in Jesus. If there was people outside of my, youth group friends or my church friends or whatever, I just found it almost paralyzing to think about sharing about it. So that was the status of me and my kind of spirituality when I was 17 years old, and I went to work for the first time at a Bible conference. A Bible conference was like a little Christian retreat location where basically myself and 50 or 60 other teenagers helped to make up the rooms and clean the floors and do the dishes and so on, so that families and youth groups could come for a week at a time and get some really encouraging words of the Lord in chapel, and then go to the beach. So I used to work there over the summer. But I just started this particular summer when I was 17 years old, and I'd only been there a couple of days. And I remember, I don't know how long, maybe I'd been there a week, but I remember coming to our chapel service on a Monday night. Because we went to chapel every week, or every day in the evening. And I remember coming in on Monday night, and I recall that the speaker was a man named Brooks Solberg. I don't know if he's still alive. I don't know where he is, but I think Brooke was a nickname. I think he was from Brooklyn. And he shared a message. It was really straightforward, very clear message. And it was just about the cross. It's just about Jesus on the cross and all that is kind of tied in with that. And I don't remember a lot of the details, but I remember being deeply, deeply impacted as he just talked about the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus. And You know, the gospel writers, they understood this idea that I was mentioning right at the beginning, right? About the idea of, you know, picking the moments to communicate the meaning that you want to communicate. John, in the end of his gospel, even states that if we were to write down everything that Jesus did, we wouldn't have all the books in the world to even fill that. You know, so we're selecting things particularly. And we think of the Gospels, those 4 books at the beginning of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. You can easily think of them as the books of the life of Jesus. But really, they're very focused in terms of what they actually talk about, in terms of the life of the man Jesus when he was alive. Does anybody know how many chapters there are in the 4 Gospels put together? Okay, it's 89. 89 chapters in the 4 Gospels put together. And out of those 89, 4 of them deal with the period in Jesus' life that, you know, either was his history or anything about him that came before the beginning of his ministry, or the beginning of John the Baptist's ministry anyway. You know, just before Jesus was baptized and so on. So only 4 of them deal with like the first 30 or so years, you know? And then there is about a little bit less than 2/3 of the books in the Gospels that talk about the 3 years of ministry, the roughly 3 years of ministry. And then a good third of the books just talk about this 1 week, and then the aftermath of that 1 week. You know, so there is the 1 week starting with Jesus' arrival into Jerusalem at the end of his life, leading up to the crucifixion, the resurrection, and then everything, the little bits that it shares about what he did after that. So there's a real focus here. When we talk about the Gospels, we talk about the gospel message, we're talking about the life, but especially the sacrifice and death and the resurrection, the ongoing lordship of Jesus. You know, this is the message. And this was the message that this guy spoke about. You know, it wasn't anything fancy. There weren't any bells and whistles. It was just preaching Jesus, preaching the gospel. And it really deeply impacted me. I felt like, I don't know what it was. I just remember feeling very impacted. And he gave an invitation. And it might be the kind of invitation that a lot of us have heard in different situations, where he's kind of in a room about this size or a bit bigger. And he said, you know, if you've never made Jesus your Lord, then come on up to the front as we finish this meeting. And we're going to pray for you. But then there were other categories. He said, if you're not sure if you've ever made Jesus your Lord, you think you might have, you're not really sure what it really is, and you want to make sure, then this is your opportunity. Come to the front. Or if you have made Jesus your Lord, but you know you haven't actually followed through on that, you know that you need to recommit your life, then you can come to the front. Have you guys heard invitations like that? You've been in meetings like that? Maybe you've responded to something like that. I knew for sure that I fit into category 2. I was rock solid in that. I think I'm a Christian, I want to be a Christian, but I actually don't know. I don't know if I really have given my life to Jesus because of this issue of the fact that I was so terrified of actually sharing my faith, of being open about that. And so, under this deep conviction of the Holy Spirit, I believe, this invitation was given. Lots of people came forward, but I did not. I sat still, or I stood still, I think we were standing up, and just felt like paralyzed, like I can't go forward. I can't respond. And I was really scared. Like I say, a lot of my life I feel like was characterized by a lot of fear. And what was I scared of? I don't know, scared of being embarrassed or feeling awkward or whatever, but I think the real fear in that situation was the fear of failure. It was the fear that I would go forward and make this commitment, but my life would not change. You know what I mean? That nothing would be different. And that I would want this difference, but it somehow wouldn't take, and there wouldn't be the transformation in my life that I really needed, that I deeply wanted. And I think it reveals something, right? It reveals where my faith was, or it reveals a bit of where my faith wasn't, you know? Because if my faith was really in myself, in my capacity to affect change in my life, to grow and to mature and to take hold of the things that I should take hold of, and that positioning left me incredibly insecure, you know? And maybe it's right that it leaves me insecure, because actually to trust for life and transformation just out of my own willpower is a very shaky foundation. Do you know what I mean? So it's actually kind of right that I would feel insecure about that. God, I think, was wanting to teach me to put my trust in Him, you know? To go forward or to respond to Him and say, God, I don't know if I've got my life together. In fact, I know that I don't have my life together. But I'm throwing myself onto you, you know? And this is for you to be Lord of my life. Because the message of the gospel is not listen to this thing about Jesus and then try to work yourself into a position of obedience. But it's listen to this message of Jesus and then come to know him, come close to him, and be transformed and be impacted just by the goodness and the lordship, of our Savior. And I walked away from that meeting very frustrated and very agitated. I couldn't settle down, I couldn't calm down. But out of God's kindness, he led me into a conversation with somebody that evening. Remember, I was new at this place. I really didn't know anybody. And so there was one of the girls on staff who was a bit older than me, probably was just being kind because she knew that I was new and I looked a little bit lonely and confused or whatever. And she extended herself and just took a little walk with me. And then I felt God prompting, open up, share about what you're struggling with this person that you've never met before. You've only known for a couple of days. And I don't remember a whole lot of what she said. She encouraged me. She encouraged me to pray. She said, yes, maybe it is good that you don't make a commitment if you don't know if you can follow through on it. You know what I mean? That there is scriptures that support that. But pray about it and see what God is saying to you. And so that night, I prayed quietly in my bed. Again, it's kind of just like when I was a child, except I think that time I crept out and I knelt down by the side of the bed. This time I didn't because I was on an upper bunk, maybe, so trying to kneel down beside that might have been a little bit awkward. There would have been some other guy. But I just prayed, and I prayed something like, God, I don't know what you want with my life, but whatever you want, that's what I want. I don't know what you want with my life, but whatever you want, that's what I want to take hold of. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it's going to look like. And so I did have this response to God. And there was I really marked that as my conscious decision to really follow Christ. Even though, my informed decision, not as a child anymore, to follow Jesus. And there were slow changes in my life that came with that. God began to open me up a little bit more to the idea of being able to be more comfortable with who I was and sharing my faith and putting my trust into him. But there was a way in which, and I began to grow and I began to take on leadership responsibility. I went back to this place and kept working there. And I became like a leader in that location where I was doing Bible studies and giving input to different younger guys and so on. But there was a way in which it felt like I kind of was coming into the presence of God, but sort of trying to creep in the back door. Do you know what I mean? Instead of just sort of coming forward and saying, God, here I am, this is me, I was kind of I'm sneaking into the meeting, Jesus is there with everybody, and I'm behind him, and I don't really want anyone to pay attention to me, I don't want anyone to notice, and I'm going to try to build myself up and kind of mature myself and grow into a greater place of faith, without necessarily making a bit of a thing out of it. But it turns out that Jesus knew I was there. Okay, he was aware of me there. He said, I can actually see you. I see you right there. And then God did something really interesting. A few years later, I was at the same place. And that summer, I was in charge of the dish room. I was washing dishes for all the people who were eating. And that was a messy job, right? We had to there were 3 of us who would receive all the dishes, spray them down, put them through the machine, run them around back onto the shelves and stuff like that. If you've done dishes here, it's a little bit like that, but maybe a bit more intense, where it's in a smaller space and there's just a couple of people and you're running it all through. Just the washing of the dishes portion of it. And so the fruit of that was that you ended up possibly being slightly smelly, okay? Slightly stinky as you came out of the dish room. And of course after dinner there was chapel. And so that night I went to chapel after doing the dishes. I don't remember if I showered or not. Or if I didn't, why I wouldn't have, because usually you were pretty gross. But keel over all of a sudden. I remember coming into the back of the chapel service, waiting to go in, and there being this other person who was on staff. I'm sorry, I've got a little bit of a funny cough going on, so I'm afraid I'm going to be very demonstrative with that at some point. But there was this other girl who was on staff, and I was standing near her, and she just went, "What's that smell? What really stinks?" And I was not, feeling very awkward and uncomfortable and kind of shuffling over to the side. I have no idea if it was me for sure, but it really seemed like it was coming from the direction of me. And so, going into the chapel service, I felt really uncomfortable. Right? Because, you're sitting down like this, in these little chairs next to each other. And apparently, I smelled really, really bad. Not just oh, there's a little bit of a funny smell. It was what is that terrible smell that's coming from you? And I remember thinking, like, I was thinking, normally I would have wanted to sit with my friends, or there was this, girl that I kind of liked, I would have sat with her, but I didn't. I went and sat by myself, because I was like, I don't want to be near anybody and create this sort of reaction from anybody else. And then I had a notebook, which I would doodle in or whatever, and get distracted during the chapel services sometimes. And I had a pen, but my pen died. My pen didn't work. And so I was sitting there by myself with no one around me, with nothing to do but to listen to the message. And the speaker was a guy called Brooks Solberg, okay, who came and shared the exact same message that he had shared 3 years earlier. The exact same message about Jesus, and he gave the exact same invitation at the end of it. And now at this point in my life, I knew I was a Christian. I didn't really fit into any of these categories in terms of what I thought about myself. But I felt such an incredible challenge in my heart and a conviction that I needed to respond to this invitation, that I needed to go forward. And I was a little bit like, well, this is going to look weird. I'm like, I've been on staff here for a few years. I'm like doing Bible studies, and it looks like I'm giving my life to Jesus for the first time. And the first time that this invitation had been given, there had been a whole lot of people who had come forward. In this occasion, there was nobody else. There was nobody else. It was just me. So, under the conviction of God, I just went forward, and I sat down with this guy, and he prayed for me, and, he talked a little bit about what was going on, and, why I had come forward. And my leader in the conference came and found me later to ask me how I was going, what was going on, and I explained that to him as well. But I just thought, the thing that I want to draw out of this that I think is so amazing is God's incredible mercy. His incredible kindness, because he actually gave me an opportunity to go back in through the front door. Do you know what I mean? He went back to this moment where I had been so scared, and he gave me the opportunity to even see the growth in my own life. Do you know what I mean? To see the difference in the way that I could respond in that kind of circumstance. I feel like, we're talking about our Lord, right? We're talking about Jesus, our Lord. He deserves us not to respond in fear to his invitation. He deserves us not to respond in hesitation or reluctance when he gives instruction, when he calls us. He deserved more from me. But his response to me in that was one of it was conviction, but it was deep understanding and kindness as well. A deep mercy and kindness that he demonstrated to me. Romans 5:8 says, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." So the principle that I want to draw out, that I was thinking about as I thought about the story, was just God's character, his mercy and his faithfulness. And, even now, I can discover in myself, I'm sure we all can, times when I realize I don't see God the way he really is. I don't understand him the way he really is. And I need to let God, I need to come close to him, even in my insecurity, even in my weakness and my failures, and allow him to redefine who I understand him to be. This is the God who calls us to follow him, this God who demonstrates his love for us by dying for us, even in our sin. It's an absolute trustworthiness, right? Who would say it? Jesus is trustworthy. Is that right? But there's a big difference we also got to know between saying Jesus is trustworthy and actually trusting Jesus. You know what I mean? I believe Jesus was trustworthy. When I first heard that first call and invitation, I knew that, yes, Jesus is trustworthy, but yet it's actually really challenging for me to trust him in that situation, And that truth that he's trustworthy doesn't really have much of an impact in my life if I'm not willing to actually put my trust into him. So what I needed to learn, and I think the challenge for me and for all of us, is will we recognize God's character? Will we respond to him? Will we recognize him for the God that he really is, in his absolute lordship, but also his deep mercy and kindness? And there's lots of ways in which I've seen that challenge in my life. So at this same conference, this place was pretty significant for me in a lot of ways. And I've got a lot of good friends that I met and am still connected to from this place. But at this same conference in another summer, I heard for the first time, I really heard a challenge in my life about missions. Okay, I was 19 years old, and I heard a speaker during the very last service of the whole summer, just before I was going to go home, got up and talked about missions. I don't recall a whole lot of what the guy actually said. I remember a few little things. I remember the fact that he said missions is no longer just living in a hut in Africa. Okay? And even though I heard that, I understood it, and obviously I heard it because I still remember it, so I must have heard it. But something in my spirit basically just said, living in a hut in Africa. That was kind of like all I got out of it. You know, it's like living in a hut in Africa. And that made me feel really uncomfortable. Now, the theme for the summer, I didn't call it this because I wouldn't have known this term. But the theme that had come through in a lot of the messages that I had gotten over the summer was one of lordship. It was one of saying to Jesus, you know, God, here's my life. This paper isn't blank because it's got writing on the other side, but let's pretend. This paper is blank. This is my life. I'm going to sign it on the bottom, and I'm going to hand it over to God, and you can write, God, whatever you want onto my life. This idea of complete surrender. I'm going to give myself completely to you, to allow you to do whatever you want me to do, to guide me in any way you want. And then I heard this message about missions. And we were praying at the end of it, and my immediate response was, God, I will do whatever you want me to do in my life, but I do not want to be a missionary. So there we go. There's the beginning of the life of faith. I am a missionary, right? That is who I am now. That is definitely my vocation, my direction. And so somewhere along the way, God did something. So there was a lot of fear. Again, fear, right? Fear of what? Fear of maybe evangelism again, but also fear of just being uncomfortable. You know, fear of having to go someplace that I didn't know how it all worked. Fear of having to eat food that I didn't want to eat. You know, just fear of being culturally awkward and feeling uncomfortable. And so my response was fairly selfish, right? My response was very little to do with, well, God, how do you actually feel about this? How do you actually feel about nations that don't have an opportunity to respond to Jesus because very few people have gone to actually tell them about, you know, the living God? You know, that wasn't my grid. My grid was, oh, that's really awkward. You know what I mean? That makes me feel kind of uncomfortable. I know this is really important to God, but I don't really want to do it. Now, I didn't demand to God that I don't do it. I just said, I don't want to be a missionary. And I didn't even have a sense that God was telling me to be a missionary. I had no sense that that was actually where He was leading me. I just saw this reaction come right out of my heart. And I knew that that wasn't good, to just, you know, automatically have an area of no-go before the Lord. And so I just began to pray about it, kind of like, you know, are you wanting me to do something, maybe go on some sort of short-term mission trip? Even the little summer missions trips that my friends did just filled me with dread and, you know, and, I don't know, horror or whatever, I'm not sure. It just made me feel awful. But I ended up going to a big missions conference in the United States called Urbana, and there was like 20,000 university students, college students who had gathered together, and that was where I first heard about Youth with a Mission, where I first heard about YWAM. And I also first learned about the Discipleship Training School. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound too bad, the DTS, because they were talking about a 5-month school, and I thought, well, that's all right, there's training and there's outreach. It's not just like a day of training. It's like a whole, 3 months of training. And then you go out and you do outreach, and if it's horrible, it's only 5 months long, and so it'll end, at some point. And if I can't stand it, I probably can live with it for 5 months, I'll be okay. And so I heard about this, but I was still in the middle of studying college at the time, and I decided just to, wait until I finished and kind of see what happened. And I began to go on a bit of a season after this of learning to hear God's voice. Again, I didn't know that's what was happening, but I went to college, I graduated, I did film. My degree is in film. Film is possibly not the degree that is the least helpful for you in terms of actually getting a job in your field, but it's like certainly well up there. You know what I mean? In terms of, hey, I've got a film degree, give me a film job, and people are like, your film degree means nothing to me. You know what I mean? Kind of, in a lot of ways. But I graduated, and I was kind of like trying to figure out what am I going to do with my life. And I was really, flailing around a little bit. I had very kind and patient parents, so there was there wasn't the, you have to deal with this now because you're going to be out in the streets or something like that. I was like sort of just living at home, trying to figure it out. And I used to take walks, and I felt like God started taking me on walks just in my neighborhood. And it was like I would be taking my walks, and I would feel like I was learning to recognize God is telling me to go to the left or go to the right. I wasn't even going anyplace new, I was just walking around my block. But just go to the left, go to the right. Once I felt like He told me to go right through, which meant that I was kind of like creeping around my neighbor's backyards. But I was learning to trust God and to hear His voice. I might have made mistakes, but I felt like I was learning that. And then that built up to like greater and greater confidence in terms of having this sense, yes, God is really speaking. God is really leading me. I never had any teaching about like hearing the voice of God at this point, but just getting this until I got to the point where one day I felt like God broke into my thoughts and started talking about doing DTS. This thing that I had heard about. Going to Canada. Anybody from Canada? Anybody from Ontario in Canada? Yeah, that's almost where I went, but not quite. I was going to go to this DTS in Ontario, and I applied and was accepted, and I felt like God had really spoken to me to do this, and I had a lot of confidence about it. And then, about a month, I had prayed one of these prayers, right? God, if I am making a mistake. Has anybody prayed this prayer? God, if I am making a mistake, will you, what? Please teach me to grow in maturity to understand. No, please close the door. Close the door. Now, this is not a terrible prayer to pray, but it's probably, I would want to suggest that maybe there's more to guidance and following God than just asking Him to close doors. Do you know what I mean? That we wouldn't like just walk around until we bump into a wall or something like that. And say, I guess that's God is saying no. You know what I mean? But I prayed that prayer, and then a month and a half before my school began, I got a phone call from the base to say that the base was closing down permanently. And then my school wasn't going to run. So I thought, like, wow, that was really serious. That was really intense. God really closed this down. So I was like, well, am I still supposed to do GTS? I don't know. And so I was given a choice to apply to some other schools. I chose the one whose school started the latest, so I could kind of give myself the most time to decide, you know. And then I came to the point a little bit quicker than I expected where I had to decide. And I had been like seeking God, I'd been praying and praying and praying, and I'd been looking for that kind of, is that really you, God, experience that I had when He first told me to do GTS. And it just wasn't coming, you know what I mean? I didn't have that clarity. And then this one night that I had to decide that night, for the sake of my job that I was working at, I remember going out walking, it was winter time, and it's New York, so there's lots of snow everywhere, and the snow clouds have made these little mini mountains of snow if you come from a snowy area, you know. And I stood atop one of these little mountains because it was the closest I could get to heaven. And I was, you know, looking up. I'm sure it was very cinematic if anybody had been taking a picture of me with the street light and everything. And I was asking God, you know, speak to me. And maybe because I was on a bit of a mountain, I was reminded of the story in the Bible where Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up the mountain. And transfigures, is transfigured before them, right? It's in Mark 9, and it's in a bunch of other places as well. And I had read that or heard a lesson on that recently, and I just felt like God said to me, this only happened to these guys once. You know, this only happened one time. And then they had to go back down, and they came face to face with, like, this demon-possessed boy who, you know, no one had been able to help and everything. Like, they came face to face with, like, real challenges and real problems, you know? And I just felt like God said, you're expecting me to speak to you in this same way. But I don't just talk in this one way. You know, I talk in lots of different ways. And He gave me all this, like, incredible sense of joy and excitement about being able to hear Him. You know, and to recognize that He was telling me, yes, go and do this DTS. You know, and that He had been speaking to me all along. You know, He had always been present. And I went and did the DTS, and from there I ended up coming to Perth to do my School of Frontier Media. From there I ended up joining staff, working in the same ministries that I'm working in now. You know, all I did was just to obey little steps that God gave me, right? Now, looking back, I can say they were little steps. At the time, sometimes they felt like really challenging, confusing major mountains of guidance and understanding, right? But looking back, they were just like little things. I had to decide, yes, I will do my DTS. You know? And all I did was just face each one of those as I came across it and hopefully obey them. You know, as much as I understand, I obey the different things that God is calling me to do. And somewhere along the way, where all I could see was like what was right in front of me, somewhere along the way, God began to give me a different sort of position. You know what I mean? Where I could begin to see more than just what was right in front of me. I could begin to kind of understand a little bit of the landscape that I was walking on. And I could begin to see some things kind of going out in front of me that I knew were the way. And other things that were going out in front of me that I knew were not the way. Not because they were bad, they just weren't the way that God had called me. You know? And I began to get more and more understanding of my calling. You know, it almost like happened by mistake. It's like one day I looked back and I said, I guess I'm walking in my calling. You know, I came to Perth and I stayed. I just stayed, and I just kept doing stuff until I knew that, like, I don't want to go anywhere else. And God could lead me someplace else, but I have no sense of, like, well, this is a temporary thing, or I'm waiting for the next thing to begin. This is my calling. This is what I'm doing. And so the principle here is small steps of obedience. You know, in 1989, when I heard that message about missions, I didn't have the faith to hear Jesus say to me, I want you to be a missionary. You know what I mean? I wouldn't, even if I didn't have that reaction, I didn't have the capacity to recognize that God was saying, I want you to go and be a full-time missionary for a long time in YWAM. Do you know what I mean? But he could say to me, you know, maybe you should figure out why you're having this reaction. Maybe you should go to this missions conference. Maybe you should look at this DGS. Maybe you should learn to listen to me and to trust me when I'm speaking to you, because of his character and his goodness, right? So he grows us to greater and greater capacity as we walk in this consistent obedience with him, and we learn to obey in these small things. Does that make sense? Now my calling, though, wasn't just about my vocation, right? It wasn't just about, I'm going to be a missionary, I'm not going to work in a job or something like that. It was also in my identity. Well, my identity in every different category, but the thing I'm thinking of in particular was my identity as a filmmaker. I told you that I graduated, I got a degree in film. I grew up making movies. When I was a kid, I was making movies. I had a little camera. Before there was home video, there were these little other kinds of movie cameras. I became a film major at college, at school. Becoming a film major was the first decision that I can remember actually praying about and kind of feeling like God had led me, because I was sort of wavering between that and theater, and I felt like film was the way to go, and I felt like God really led me. And then when I went to that conference and I first learned about YWAM, it kind of tied into that too, because my encounter with YWAM was with YWAM as a dramatic, a bunch of drama guys, basically, doing skits. And I went to a seminar about the use of drama in world missions, and when I went to that, I was really challenged about the idea of consecrating my gift to God. You know, my gift and my interest and my love for filmmaking to God. Now, that's a bit of a fancy word. What does it mean to say, I'm consecrating my gift to God? Well, I think what it really means is saying to God, I'm actually willing to not do this. I'm willing to actually not do this if that's your call in my life. I'm not coming to you and saying, well, God, this is who I am. I'm a filmmaker. How do you want to use me? You know, the challenge was, come to God and say, God, this is who I am. I'm your servant. What is the area you want me to have expression? You know, yes, I got a background in film, and it's not so surprising that God would take the very things He's planted into our backgrounds and actually use them for His kingdom as we serve Him. But there was a challenge to say, this is not my idol. This is not something I can hold up to God and demand that He operate, He position me to function in. Does that make sense? If we say I'm a filmmaker, or I'm an artist, or even anything, like I'm an American, or I'm a man, or I'm a father, or anything, I could define all sorts of stuff and say, well, God, these are my boundaries and my limitations. These are my special privileges and my special rights that I get because of this label that I've built for myself, this way I've identified myself. But the truth is that we're just men and women of God, you know, and then He gives us expression in different areas. But I didn't understand that. I got this challenge at the time. I didn't fully know what it meant. And I graduated from college, remember, and I just began to try to figure out my way through. I just began to figure out, like, well, what can I do? And it was like I was that guy walking around until there was a wall that I bumped into. You know, and saying, well, I guess that's the wrong way now, because I just bumped my nose into a wall. You know, and so I remember having graduated and, again, like not knowing, well, what did this mean for me? What am I going to do with my film degree? How am I going to actually find an expression in the life of this? And then one day, a friend of mine, I got into a bunch of weird situations. Okay, just weird, funny stuff. And I got into the situation where a friend of mine from college said, hey, I've got a job as a director of photography. That's like the cameraman, the guy in charge of the camera and the lighting, for this really low-budget movie that's being done in New York City. And I need to hire a crew. I need to get, you know, somebody to hold the microphone and to record the sound and all that kind of stuff. So we got 3 of us, me and 2 other guys that I graduated with, to come, or I went to school with, to come and work. And so this was great. I was like, I'm only a few months out of college. I don't know what I'm doing with my life, but all of a sudden I'm working on a film and somebody's even paying me to do it. Which is, actually, when I think about it, this is the only time in my entire life that I actually got paid to make a movie. I worked in television a little bit, I got paid for that, but this is the only time I actually worked on a film where someone gave me money. So, it was a bit of a weird production. I didn't really know what to make of it. I never saw the script, that I saw some publicity material, and it was like this film that had like this martial arts superhero guy in it called The Dragon. I never saw that guy because I don't know who he was supposed to be or if we had an actor or whatever. But we didn't finish this movie, just so you know. This movie did not get done. But there were like these mob guys, and then there were like these young punks from New York City who were like growing up on the streets, but now one of them wanted to be a cop, and the others were like, hey man, you're like selling us out because you're like becoming a cop, you know? And it's like, no, I'm gonna give something back to my community. We're filming these sorts of scenes. I don't know what is going on in this story. By the way, I don't really have a really strong New York accent, and people often wonder why I don't, and then I go back to New York and they wonder why I don't have an Australian accent. This is just the way that I talk. But as I tell this story, there'll be other voices coming through. So we're filming this movie, and then the first sign I get that something kind of weird is going on is that we are filming in this bar, like during the daytime when it's closed. And one of my friends notices that the back room, the bar has like a back room. And the back room has like this like octagonal green table kind of set up in the middle of it, and like an electronic slot machine over. It's like a little mini casino. You know, really tiny little mini casino in the back of this club or this bar. I'm like, oh, this is really strange. Where are we? I mean, what kind of situation have we gotten ourselves into? And then we went to go film in this Italian restaurant. And we're filming this scene where like all the mob guys get together, you know, to have their meeting. And these guys all showed up, and they were really, really realistic. Okay? So there's like 30 guys all coming in, like, oh yeah, here we are, we're gonna film this movie now. Here we go. And I didn't actually hear this, I got this secondhand, but apparently one of them said something like, well, do you think we can use our real guns for this scene? Now, I don't remember these guys' names either, but then the guy who was supposed to be like the big boss was coming. We were doing this scene with the guy who played the big boss, the actor who played the big boss was coming into the room. And he came and he was this huge guy, this big kind of like Godfather-looking kind of guy. And like I say, I don't remember his name, but everyone was like, hey, Petey's here. Petey, how you doing? Good to see you, Petey. How you doing, Petey? How's your daughter, Petey? How you feeling, Petey? You want to drink, Petey? You want a chair, Petey? They were being like really, really respectful, you know what I mean? And really honoring to this guy. And we came to the bit where we all sat around, well not we, but the actors all sat around the table where they're having the meeting. And the one young hothead character is supposed to get up and like angrily yell at somebody. He's supposed to pull out his gun and kind of threaten somebody right at the meeting. And Petey says, no, Joey, if you're gonna threaten somebody with a gun, you do it like this, okay? You do it like this. And Joey's like this, Petey? Am I doing it right, Petey? Am I threatening somebody with a gun, right, Petey? My friends and I are just kind of standing there like, and I remember honestly having the thought, we're in this Italian restaurant, and I thought if I hear the screech of tires outside of this restaurant, I just feel like I have to hit the deck. You know what I mean? I don't know what's going to happen next. And my friend who got us the job, he was getting kind of agitated because something wasn't going right, and I think it was a bit difficult working with Petey. And he was kind of beginning to get a bit afraid and get a bit annoyed. And then the guy who was like the script writer, who was actually a police officer, who had written the script for the movie, he came over to us and said, you've got to get your friend like under control. You don't want to like get Petey on Petey's backside. Okay? You don't want to get Petey angry with you. So we're like, okay. And I told my friend to take a walk for a little while, we'll take care of this next bit without him. We shot over a couple of weekends. And then it was time to go home, and we come back the next weekend, and all of a sudden, during that week, the film just stopped. And it turned out the director had just disappeared. He'd just taken off or something like that. And there was some kind of rumor that maybe he had been ripping off both the mob guys and the police officer guys financially, or something like that. And so that was the end of that production. That movie never got made. And I thought, maybe I don't know. Like it's very unlikely that the young film graduate is going to get called to work on a set where somebody's going to actually pay them cash. Maybe I should have known better. But that was my one financially lucrative job that I've ever had, making a movie. But my point of my story is that this is just one of, and there was another time, I'll tell you this really quickly, but just where I got into a bunch of weird situations after I graduated school, because I was trying to figure out, what am I doing? I'm just walking around letting things happen to me. You know, the other time I was working with the same guys and we were filming all night long, every night, for like a week or something like that. And it was really tiring, and then we had like 6 or 8 hours in the day to kind of sleep, and then get up and go back to work again filming. And the one time, it was just too far away to go back to my house, so we went and crashed at the home of one of the other crew members. And I remember just going in, there was like 5 or 6 of us. The guy was really generous to let us sleep in his place because it was really small. And he just had like a 1-room apartment. I ended up sleeping on like a love seat, you know what I mean? Like a 2-seater couch with really high arms. So it was like kind of way down on my back with my legs kind of sticking up in the air and everything. And this guy's house, this guy's apartment was like just, on every surface of the wall was like pornographic pictures. You know? So it was like, oh, goodness. And then the guy, because we only had like a really short time to go to sleep and wake up again and then get back to work, he, instead of going to sleep, I think he might have pulled out like 9 or 12 beers and just drank them all while he watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 on video. And I was just lying there going, what on earth is happening to me? Where am I? What planet have I gone to? You know what I mean? It's like the most disgusting experience I can think of on every level, happening all around me. But here I am, you know, this is where, but how did I get myself into these situations? You know, it wasn't because I heard from God, right? Now, God might lead us to this stuff, but it wasn't because, this just didn't happen because I heard from God. I wasn't being led by Him. I was trying to build my own identity. You know, I was trying to find, in my own ability, find my position in this whole world of filmmaking. So I was wandering around, just following whatever looked good until I bumped into a wall. I had to learn to consecrate my gift to God and allow Him to be Lord in that area. What time is it? I'll try to finish up quickly. Psalm 37, 3, 4, 5, 6 says, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. You know, I got to the end of my DTS, what I felt like God told me, or what my response to God at the end of the whole school was, God, I know I need to serve you. That's the only thing I really know for sure. I need to serve you. And I like to make movies. And then it turned out that, of course, you say this to other people on YWAM, they're like, oh, we have all these exciting programs that we can get you into, you know? But for me, it was really key to recognize, you know, I don't have to make movies. I just need to serve God. You know? And hopefully my gift is and remains consecrated to Him. But as I followed Him, I did get involved in the filmmaking, as I've mentioned. And I'm still doing that. And I got into a lot of other weird experiences. Okay, a lot of other weird stuff happened. Really, in a lot of ways, just as weird as my experiences on those 2 movies. Right? I was working with difficult people. I was in difficult environments. I was working with, you know, very little sleep or very little energy or very few resources. In a lot of ways, just as weird. But what was the difference? The difference is that this was done in response to Jesus' call. Right? Because God had actually spoken something. And He called. So then what did that make it? It made it worthwhile to fight for. It made it something that was worth actually giving my all to and fighting for and having energy for. In 2004, I was in India on an outreach, working with an unreached people group to make a film. It was my first time that I completely led a team by myself. That nobody that was like my leader had been there for any of the trip whatsoever. And we shot for 2 weeks, and the first week was going really slowly. Everything was like just quite dragging, and you know, all the problems that you often have working in these sort of different conditions. We had an actor we had to replace, there's power outages on a regular basis, just things are going slow. We're coming to the Friday, the end of the first week, and we were doing our first scene that we were filming in the village. Okay, we've been shooting in the city, now we're going up to the village. We had arranged, like 5 days earlier, for certain actors to meet us at this particular village. There was no way to easily call these guys. So we're just hoping that they'll actually turn up. And I am feeling deathly sick. Well, not deathly sick, but I'm sick. I'm feeling really lousy. And I'm like, I can't not go because I'm leading the team, and there's nobody else in this group that I'm working with who's got the skill to actually direct the film that we need to direct. Like, nobody else has any experience in that at all. But I didn't know how I could function. So I made the decision, okay, I'm going to go, and I'm probably just going to be like half dead in the car the whole time. And then this girl over here is part of my team who I think has got the best capacity for this. You're going to direct. And, you know, you've got a good cameraman who knows what they're doing, so they can help you. And then you can come and see me in the car whenever you need to, and if I'm alive, I'll come out and I'll see you, and have any input that I can have. And so then we did this, and we prayed. We prayed beforehand, and we felt like God said to us, this is your day of victory, or this is your victory day, something like that. And so then our victory day began to unfold. I was really sick in the car, and there was another guy in our team who was really sick as well, so there were 2 of us sick in the car, just sitting around being unwell. And then every once in a while, the girl would come back to say, well, it's not really happening yet. Because it turned out that only 2 out of the 4 actors that we were expecting had actually turned up. Like one of them was our main guy who was around with us, and then a woman who lived in the village. And then it turned out that the woman was having a terrible time saying even one line of dialogue because people were laughing at her. It's terrible. Like in her home village, because it was her village, they were watching her act, they were like laughing at her and making her feel uncomfortable. And then it just dragged on like this. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. And finally the thought was, we're going to go to another village. You know, it's 5 minutes away. Of course, it's more like 30 minutes away, but it's just 5 minutes away. And we had got a new actor to replace one of the ones who was missing, but this new guy didn't want to come with us to this other location. Okay, well, let's go there and see if we can find somebody. We drive there, it takes us half an hour. As we're driving into the village, a lady that I can only imagine is disturbed in some way, watches our van come in, and she picks up a shard of pottery and just walks up to the van and just chucks it at the side of the van as hard as she can. She doesn't like us. She doesn't like us being there. And we're like, man, this is going really badly. And then we ate, and I'm feeling sick, and then we filmed, and we tried, and it was so slow, and at the end of the day, we had planned to do like 4, 5, 6 scenes, something like that. We got like 1.5 scenes done. And then I've been holding on all day, and I just really needed to go to the toilet. And I won't go into detail into this part of the story, but just all I just say that I don't have a lithe and nimble figure, and I do find that dealing with Asian toilets not to be the simplest process. But that was okay, because there was no Asian toilet, there was just a wall in a field, and that was the toilet. And so I had an experience there by the wall. And I figure at the very least, I'm very far away from anybody, so they can't, even if they're looking, they can't see much. But, and then we got into the car and we drove back, and on the way back, I got sick and I had to get out of the car and I had to throw up. Right? The end. So that was the day of victory! The day of breakthrough. And so, but for some weird reason, it really was kind of like a victory day, because we got back and I was like, well, that was horrible, but I guess we've got 1 more week to try to make this up. The next day we were doing some other stuff, and I had a rest, and then Sunday or whatever, we got back into it. We had 1 more week to do maybe 75% of the project, and maybe we'd done like 1/4 of it in half the time. And after that, it just all began to happen. It all began to flow. Everything began to work out. Actors showed up, they got their lines, scenes came together. And so I'm like, well, what actually happened there? The only thing I can sort of figure out is that we just saw a breakthrough because of perseverance. Do you know what I mean? God had spoken something, we persevered, and breakthrough came. Now I think about breakthrough in the Bible. Breakthrough is the Red Sea opening up, right? Breakthrough is the walls coming down. It's the enemy going into confusion and fighting each other. It's all these sort of amazing, miraculous things taking place. There's another one written down. What was it? Oh, the sun standing still. All this incredible stuff. But if you actually read those stories, what you see is those moments come during really difficult times, right? For the most part. They come after long battles. They come when things are looking really bad. The Red Sea happens when people are running away, you know what I mean, in terror. The breakthrough moments that are really dramatic, they don't necessarily take place in a way that just makes everything easy for people. These guys at the end, when they saw those miracles, they didn't just feel like, wow, God just made it so easy for us. Do you know what I mean? It was like, that was really hard, and then God broke through. So I was thinking about this. What is breakthrough? My experience of breakthrough is like falling off a cliff. Okay? So here's breakthrough. I'm falling off a cliff, and I'm going to plummet to my doom. And I reach up, and I find like a thread. Okay? Like a hair. Kind of sticking out the side of the cliff. And I hold on to that hair. And of course, it's not strong enough to hold me. So I'm like scrambling, like a cartoon. Do you know what I mean? Just to hold on to it and keep pulling the hair down so I don't fall all the way to my depth below. And then the hair, at some point, it begins to get a little bit thicker. Okay, the hair becomes like a bit of a string. And now I'm holding onto a string, and it's holding my weight just a little bit more. And then the string kind of gets a little bit stronger, and it becomes like a bit of a twine or a cord or whatever. And eventually it's a rope, and then eventually it's like the root of a tree. And then I'm holding onto that, and I'm holding onto the branch of a tree, and finally I pull myself over that cliff, and I'm standing on solid ground again, and there's breakthrough. Do you know what I mean? That's when the walls come down. Do you know what I mean? And that's when the Red Sea parts, and that's when the enemy goes into confusion, and wipes each other out. That's when the sun stands still. That's the lesson that I feel like I learned that day. Now, what's the key to that? Again, it's still understanding the character of God, right? It's being able to listen and respond to the things that God is saying. It's actually knowing that my gift, my offering is consecrated, it's crucified to God. And now I'm doing the things that He's called me to do, and I'm persevering and fighting through them. Okay, I'm going to finish up. That was the illustrations. Okay? Here's the message. The message is really short. You ready? Jesus Christ is Lord. My Lord loves me. That's the message. Jesus Christ is Lord. My Lord loves me. The challenge is to get a revelation of God's character, to walk in obedience as we work out our calling, to let our gift be crucified to God, and then hear from Him and cry for what He's given you. Because Jesus is Lord. He really deserves all this worship. He really deserves it. It's not an angry, distant thing. It's close and it's intimate. And He deserves this response from me, where I would actually say to Him, yes. And actually say to Him, yes, Lord. But then with that, there's this deep, deep kindness and this deep, deep love. Jesus Christ, my Lord. Jesus, the Son of God, the Son of Man, the promised Messiah who came from God and came to live, to give life abundantly, who went to the cross as a willing servant, purposely redeemed me from the pit of hell. Colossians 1:15. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in Him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. And He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything He might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through His blood shed on the cross. Jesus Christ is Lord. He's my Lord, and He's your Lord, He's our Lord, and our Lord loves us. And that's the God that we serve and we follow. Can I just pray, just as we finish off? Father, I just ask for greater revelation of this message, God, this message that I feel like You gave me, that You are the Lord, and that You love us. God, and all the implications of that. God, when we get revelation, deep revelation, and live our life recognizing that You are the Lord, it deals with everything, God. It deals with our insecurities. It deals with our fears. It deals with our identity issues, God. Lord, when nations get this revelation, God, it would deal with the problems of the nations. It would deal, Lord, with the challenges that people face. It would deal with hatred. It would deal with selfishness, God. It would deal with abuse. It deals with terror, God. It deals with every issue on this earth. God, the revelation that You are Lord. I pray today for just a deeper revelation for all of us, God, for those who feel we deeply have that, and for those who feel like it's a challenge. God, that we would receive a deeper revelation and lay hold of a deeper revelation of who You are, of Your Lordship and Your love. I ask You for that, Lord, for myself and for all of us here. In Your name we pray.